little bit like science, or if you're a little more prescient, you might say, well, it's sort of a history of science. But our major topic today is going to be on the scientific revolution and how this begins to influence world thinking and society, etc. So we're not going to be specifically interested just in the scientific discoveries in and of themselves, that is sort of a science or history of science kind of topic, but we have to cover this ground a little bit in order to understand how this begins to influence society and the way that people begin to look at their world. In a lot of ways, you have to do the scientific revolution in order to understand the Enlightenment. The Enlightenment is something, of course, that you have to do in order to understand the history of the last 400 or 500 years. So this is where we're going to be going today, and it's going to be a pretty radical break for those of you that had World History 1. A lot of your sort of ancient and medieval kind of thought patterns begin to go away thanks to the scientific revolution and what begins to change with it. So we talked a lot about different, what they would call natural philosophers, what you and I might call scientists, but these are these people that begin to give us the scientific revolution, and we'll talk about what takes place as a result of that. The roots of the scientific revolution, of course, are going to be in the Renaissance of the 14 and the 1500s. And this is going to cause some major changes in terms of Western thought, and this is going to have great impact on Western society that eventually is going to get exported around the world as we get into subsequent centuries. Now, to go back, for those of you that either didn't study the Renaissance, didn't have World History 1, or for those of you that did study it but can't remember it, one of the major facets of the Renaissance was the seeking of classical texts, going back and looking at the ancient sort of Greek sources, the ancient Latin, the Roman sources, and then eventually as we get into Northern Europe, an increased interest in particularly ancient Christian sources. But those that begin to run out here in the 1500s. Okay, we've looked at kind of all this stuff, what's available. We're going to plumb the depths of ancient knowledge for as much wisdom as we can get out of them. And then they begin to look, okay, how do we apply this, and what new things are there as well. One of the more underappreciated advances of the Renaissance in terms of its impact on science is going to come from art. Normally we look at Renaissance art and we say, oh, well, it's really nice, and art people will tell you about the great technical changes with, perspective and photorealism and horizon lines and vanishing points and light sources and all that kind of stuff. And I don't want to take away from any of that, but in terms of how this begins to impact society, is a lot of these people in an era where there is no such thing as photography, these people who are engaged in what you and I would call science, are completely reliant upon the human eye for recording observable phenomena. Particularly of interest initially is going to be astronomy. This is going to sound like astronomy class for a little while. But these are going to be people that are going to be gazing up at the heavens, and due to, in part, technical training in art and the ability to reproduce what they find on paper, is going to create some interesting avenues for intellectual advancement as well. And so this overall approach is going to change as a result of the scientific revolution towards what had been the natural philosophies. It's going to eliminate a lot of these medieval sort of ideas, some of which, Galenic medicine, the humors of the body and things like that, that's going to begin to go away. Some that are sort of quasi-scientific, like alchemy, where you've got some legitimate, what we would today call, sort of chemical processes in the study of chemistry, married to things like astral magic and phases of the moon and stuff like that. Numerology, etc. And so, as you go through, this is Galenic medicine. It's Galen, named after him. These various sort of the four major fluids of the body, when they get out of alignment, that's what causes you to get sick. Ever increasingly, people were, no, I don't think that's it. Okay, here you can see the alchemist at work, taking some of these chemical ideas of the legitimate laboratory and putting them with some kind of kooky ideas. Here's astral magic, the idea that you can cause planets to rise at certain times. or the different sort of planets means different things based on, sort of when you were born. The idea of numerology, different numbers and different sequences, this is what they mean. And so anyway, this is a lot of what people were into and begins to give way thanks to what you and I would refer to as science. Now, this is still a much more medieval world in the scientific revolution than you and I would probably feel comfortable living. We would shake our heads at some of the even the ancient science or these scientific revolution guys and say, yeah, you guys don't quite have it yet. And this is evidenced with one of the major goals of particularly medieval astronomy, and that was to predict the future. The idea of stars and signs of stars and planets and signs of planets and their ability to predict the future, this was a great moneymaker. This was the ability that people were into astrology way more than they are now, and if you could successfully predict what was going to happen in the heavens, then you could successfully predict, supposedly, actions here on Earth. And normally this is pretty easy because the stars and constellations, they do follow a fixed pattern. You can predict those down to the second or even fractions of a second. But the problem with this was the planets. The planets tended to wander around, and none of the systems that people had come up with really accurately predicted them. And so when you go through these various models, you'll see that was really the root of a lot of what these guys were trying to do. The Greek astronomer, a guy named Ptolemy, he was one of the Ptolemaics guys in North Africa, he observed this motion in the heavens, and he began to construct this model. Okay, there are probably bodies in space, and they're moving around, all right? And the idea that he came up with was that the Earth was at the center of this model, and then the planets and the sun and all that kind of moved around us, and then the stars were on the outside of that. Okay, super, right? This is the first attempt. We would look at this and go, well, they got it wrong. The Earth's not really at the center of this. It's not even at the center of our solar system. But the idea that there is a model of bodies in space, we would sort of, okay, all right, well, he's got that part right? And this concept was that the Earth was made of 4 basic elements. You had earth, wind, water, and fire. But what about all this other stuff? These are people that are very comfortable with the supernatural. What's that made of? We got to classify that somehow. And so this was a mysterious 5th element, right? This is sometimes referred to as the quintessence, right? It's the God stuff, right? It's whatever that's made of, that's what that is. And so you'll see later Christian people will grab onto this idea and say, well, the quintessence, that's what heaven's made of, or whatever, right? So to Ptolemy, right, as I mentioned, everything rotated around the Earth in perfect circles with heaven in the outermost circle. This quintessence existed outside of all of this, right? So when Christianity came into this system, right, this very much fit with their ideas and is generally accepted for about 1,500 years or so. This was, how things operated, right? But it doesn't explain the awkward movement of the planets. The planets couldn't be pinned down to exact rising times and setting times and things like that. Here you can see a model of one of these. There's the Earth at the middle, and you got all these different planetary bodies rotating around the Earth. And so that's this one, right? And the problem with this, as I mentioned, is it doesn't fit the data. You go out and you say, well, we got this model, and this should happen. But when I go out and actually observe it, that's not what happens, right? And so ever increasingly, these people working in astronomy realize